Hi, it's Martha DeSanti, Doctor of Chiropractic, Yoga and Pilates teacher. Today we're going to be talking about the important concept of hinging at the hip rather than bending from the low back. Most of us are already too flexible in forward bending in our lumbar spine because that's where we've been bending for most of our lives. We've been culturally conditioned that it's impolite to kind of stick your butt out when leaning forward, so most of us have been bending from that low back to pick things up for a long time. A lot of people are even challenged when it comes to hinging at their hip because their body's lost touch with their brain as far as how to communicate that idea of bending at that big hip hinge rather than at the low back. So this is a way to start reconnecting with that ability and finding out where that big hip hinge is and how to key into that when you're doing important functional movements in your life. A couple instances I can think of are things like shoveling, where you want to be able to bend the knees, bend at the hips, and then you're shoveling and moving with your legs in your body instead of leaning from your low back. Another instance is something as simple as if you're leaning over to brush your teeth and spit toothpaste into the sink and you're continually doing it from low back. You can always bend your knees, hinge at your hips, and stick your tail out. And over the long haul, your low back's going to be really appreciative of that. It's going to save you a lot of wear and tear on the low back and keep you more comfortable. It's also going to key into your glute muscles, which get turned off a lot of times after sitting for too long. So to help reactivate glutes, prevent that flat butt, we need to get the brain talking to the glutes. So one way to do that is thinking about the hip hinge. So if you're in a standing position, you can take your hands and find that hip crease on the front side of the body. And what you're going to think about doing is bending the knees, because most of us have tighter hamstrings that are going to limit our movement if we don't bend those knees first. And then stick the tail out. And try not to let the chest completely drop down and forward. Keep it lifted slightly. But think about if you were going to sit back into a chair. So the idea of hinging at the hips and sticking the tail out. So knees bend, hips hinge. And you can play with the idea of continuing to hinge forward until you're in like a flat back position with knees bent and then your spine long from tailbone to the top of the head. And at this point, I would bet most people are feeling a little hamstring stretch there. I know I am. So this is a good way to kind of explore that hip hinge. And another thing to think about when you're coming up from positions like this, once you've hinged that hip, think about driving your heels down into the ground, engaging these glutes. So we want to fire those glutes to help raise you back up as you dig the heels down into the ground. So that's a little bit of exploration of the hip hinge and why that's important. So don't be afraid to hinge at that hip, stick that tail out, because it's going to help keep the back protected. Thanks again for watching. If you have any questions or comments, as always, leave them below the video. And again, this is Dr. Martha, helping you get back in body.